look everyone, it's spooky season! Lock your doors, close your curtains and get those fun-sized chocolate bars at the ready because it's time to frighten ourselves with some seriously creepy video games. We've talked about good horror games till we're blue in the face though, and whilst yes, it is nice to find a game that's a competent scarefest, it's way more fun to talk about those that are terrifying because they're so bad. With this in mind, we've taken a wander down the darkest back alleys of gaming history in order to bring you 10 of the most awful titles that the horror genre has to offer. We did make the mistake of splitting up while we were looking for them though, and we haven't seen James Jenkins in weeks. We're pretty sure the Phantom of TripleJump Towers hasn't got him though. To be super clear, these aren't necessarily the absolute worst spooky video games ever made, but if nothing else, they're worse than most. I'm that one presenter that's hiding under your bed and haunting your nightmares, Ashton from TripleJump, and here are 10 terrible horror games that are scarily bad. Number 10, D. We're kicking off our list with a game that, at the time of its original release at least, didn't do too badly with critics. These days though, most agreed that D is not a particularly good horror title. D focuses on protagonist Laura Harris, as she goes to investigate a hospital after learning that her father has gone on a crazed killing spree and barricaded himself inside. However, once she arrives, the hospital transforms into a castle, which she must explore in order to uncover the truth and find her bloodthirsty pops. The game's USP was the fact that it had to be completed within 2 hours, and gave players no option to pause or save, meaning the whole game had to be finished in a single run. Although critics, even in contemporary reviews, praised the game's graphics, story and time limit, most agreed that it was let down by its simplicity and short length. Because D had to be completed within 2 hours, the puzzles couldn't be particularly taxing. But sadly, the developers made them so easy that there was little danger of players running out of time, thus removing any tension imposed by the timer. D wasn't completely horrible, but if you were looking for a survival horror title in 1995, there were far better options. Number 9, Illbleed. Illbleed is one of those games where if you don't think too hard about the premise, then it's absolutely fine. A theme park that pays out a large cash reward but only to those who survive? How spooky. If you put any thought into it though, the whole thing falls apart. Why aren't the authorities putting a stop to this? Who would want to go to a theme park that they'll probably die in? And who on earth has enough money to build an entire theme park just to kill people? Don't answer that last one. I'm sure similar ideas have gone through Elon Musk's head at some point. A slightly wonky premise wasn't Illbleed's only issue. And although critics had some love for the game mechanics, especially the horror monitor, it still didn't end up being a very enjoyable experience. Critics found that the camera was very inconsistent, so whilst it was fine during the exploration segments, it became quite frustrating during combat. The controls were also clunky, often failing to register the buttons that players were pressing, and the collision detection was hit and miss. Is Illbleed the very worst horror game ever made? No, not by a long shot, but that still doesn't make it worth playing. Number 8, Nosferatu. Considering that there was a whopping 72 years between the release of Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, and its video game tie-in, Nosferatu must hold some sort of record between a movie and its corresponding game. You might assume that such a respected horror property would spawn a half-decent gaming experience, but oh how wrong you'd be. Gameplay-wise, Nosferatu was similar to titles like Prince of Persia, which is a tonal shift if I've ever seen one. And players were expected to platform around the place, punching monsters with their bare fists. The game actually looked quite impressive for the time it was released, with critics praising the title for its cinematic style. For all of its good looks though, Nosferatu was hugely frustrating to play. A title in which players get to bare-knuckle box the likes of Frankenstein's monster should have been a ton of fun, but the whole thing was repetitive and soon became tedious. The controls didn't help matters either, with critics complaining that they were largely unresponsive, making Nosferatu an exercise in frustration. If you're after a vampire-themed platformer from the 90s, forget this rubbish and seek out a copy of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. You'll thank me later. Number 7, Lifeline. Here at Team TripleJump, we love it when video games try new things. After all, variety is the spice of life, and our jobs wouldn't be much fun if developers churned out the exact same thing year in, year out.
Don't you do- Oh my god! Oh my god! Why did she do that?
Innovation is all well and good when it works properly though, and whilst 2003's Lifeline for the PS2 may well have had a very cool sounding USP, in practice it fell completely flat. You see, rather than using a regular controller to make protagonist Rio navigate the monster-infested space station on which she is trapped, players had to use a USB headset and tell her what to do. Now, anyone who has a smart speaker will tell you how wonky voice commands can be even today, so you can imagine how successful this was 20 years ago. Part of the issue was the fact that, although Rio recognised over 5,000 different words, players didn't actually know what those words were, so getting her to do something as simple as picking up an item was hugely frustrating if you weren't able to get the phrasing correct. Lifeline was almost certainly ahead of its time, and if such a game were developed today, it would probably be worth a play. Sadly, the original offering was nothing to shout about. Number 6. Geist. Here's a fun fact for you. Geist was the second GameCube title published by Nintendo to be bestowed with an M rating by the ESRB, the first being Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem. Sadly, this is where the similarities between the two games end, because where Eternal Darkness was, good, Geist was not. Geist focuses on scientist John Raimi as he attempts to find his body after his soul is separated from it. The game's core gameplay mechanic is John's ability to possess creatures and objects, which sounds quite cool on paper, but was pretty naff in practice. Although gamers were hyped about Geist prior to its release, when they finally got their hands on it, they were seriously disappointed. Admittedly, the game's innovative ideas and story garnered some praise from critics, but its technical shortcomings ultimately let it down. Players complained of sluggish controls, poor frame rate and horrible character animations, all of which prevented Geist from being enjoyable. Some also felt that the possession mechanic was underused, likening the experience to that of a Scooby-Doo villain rather than an actual terrifying ghost. Put it this way, if you're going to offer players the opportunity to possess things, it's safe to assume they won't want to possess dog bowls. Number 5. Chiller. Buckle in, boys, girls and others, because we're taking a trip all the way back to the 1980s. Make sure you've all been to the loo before we leave, it's quite a long journey. No, James, you can't sit in the front, Ben already called shotgun. Now, don't get us wrong, we are all for killing squishy NPCs, but generally speaking, we tend to prefer it if they're deserving of their fate. Alas, the unlucky victims in 1986's Chiller had seemingly done nothing to deserve the end they got. The premise of Chiller was thus. You, the player, are an unseen torturer, and it's up to you to mutilate and murder a variety of NPCs. None of them fight back, so there's no risk of player death, and the challenge is simply to figure out how to trigger the torture devices to which they're strapped, and kill them as quickly as possible. Shockingly, the arcade cabinet didn't sell very well, because most arcade owners refused to purchase it, on account of all the mindless violence. As we know, a game being violent doesn't necessarily make it bad, but it does have to offer something in addition to bucket loads of gore. Unfortunately, Chiller had no story or challenge to offset all the nastiness. Number 4. Hollow. Ever since Alien scared the absolute willies out of the world in 1979, horror fans have been gaga for isolated space-themed spookums. The formula has translated quite well to video games in more recent years, with the likes of Dead Space and Alien Isolation being particular standouts in the sci-fi horror field. Then there are games like Switch-exclusive Hollow, which are just an embarrassment. The game begins with the amnesiac player character awakening in an emergency capsule drifting near the mining ship Shakhtar 1. The only thing the protagonist remembers, somewhat bizarrely, is a docking code, and once aboard the main vessel, it's quite clear that something isn't quite right. Cue nightmarish creatures, body horror, and a bad time all round. The most obvious flaw with Hollow is its visuals, and look like they've been recorded with a 1980s home video camera with Vaseline smeared on the lens. Look beyond the graphics though, and things don't much improve. Players found the protagonist's movements to be lethargic, the controls cumbersome, and the combat unpredictable, but not in a good way. If you're looking for a sci-fi spooking this Halloween, stick with the likes of System Shock, and whatever you do, avoid Hollow like the plague. Number 3. Weeping Doll. If done well, horror games can be hugely frightening in VR. Take Resident Evil 7 as an example. Being trapped in the Baker house is terrifying enough when it's first person on your TV, but stick the whole experience right in front of your eyeballs and it's downright horrific. Now, we appreciate that not every developer has Capcom's experience or big bucks, so we weren't expecting a huge amount from Weeping Doll, but it still managed to disappoint. The game centres on a maid working for a family of 4. The husband and wife she works for have 2 daughters, one of whom they keep locked away due to a birthmark on her face, and it's up to the maid to unravel what's going on with this weird family unit. This could have been the setup for a very creepy adventure indeed, but alas, Weeping Doll fell apart at the seams. The setting itself was unsettling enough, and the puzzles were, in places, half decent, but the poor writing and worse voice acting kept the game from being truly spooky. The worst thing about Weeping Doll, though, was that it ends out of nowhere, and without telling the player, which is bizarre at best and downright unforgivable at worst. Number 2, Resident Evil Survivor. In 1996, Capcom released the absolutely stellar Resident Evil. They followed it up with the equally wonderful Resident Evil 2, and then again in the following year with the fantastic Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Alas, the studio's luck clearly ran out in the year 2000, at least for a short time, as Resident Evil Survivor was a bunch of plops. Unlike its predecessors, which were of the survival horror persuasion, Survivor was a first-person light gun shooter. Players jump into the shoes of an amnesiac protagonist who must fight off hordes of zombies, all whilst trying to uncover who he is. A shooter where players get to gun down fan-favourite Resi monsties with reckless abandon could have been fun, but Survivor entirely missed the mark. The first major problem with Survivor was the fact it was supposed to be played with a light gun, but the American version of the game didn't support the peripheral. Things weren't much better for those in other territories either, as the gameplay was slow-paced, the graphics were pixelated, and the game suffered from some painfully long load times. Fortunately, Capcom soon got their mojo back, releasing Resident Evil Code Veronica a month after Survivor, and the series hasn't had a bad entry since. And number 1, Agony. Sometimes a game's title can leave players confused in regards to what they can expect from it. Then there are others, like Agony, that give players a very clear picture of what they're likely to feel whilst playing the game. In terms of its name at least, Agony is right on the money. In every other regard though, it's a travesty of a game. Released in 2018, Agony transports the players to hell, both figuratively and literally, where they must set about trying to find the Red Goddess so that they can escape. We'll get their usual criticism out of the way first. On a technical level, Agony was a complete failure. It was riddled with bugs and glitches, the gameplay was fundamentally broken, as well as being dull and repetitive, and the graphics, sound, and voice acting were all subpar. Perhaps the worst thing about Agony, though, was that the studio had clearly intended for the game to sell based on its shock value. Sure, the viscera-covered landscapes are pretty gross the first time you see them, but you soon get used to it. There are no peaks or troughs. Agony starts extreme and never lets up. And the result is a game that, for all its attempts to shock, actually ends up being pretty tedious.